Hey folks, Author Diary. I don't remember when I did the last one. I've not been keeping a consistent schedule, but we march along, and part of what I'm going to do to try and get a little bit better about getting these out in a timely fashion is abandon the structure that I have been planning for these diaries. I had it all laid out, like I'll talk about these things in this order, and I threw it away. Instead, I'm just going to talk about the bits that I feel like talking about the most at any given point when I'm ready to talk about them. So let's talk about magic systems in fantasy fiction, because my book is a fantasy novel. There is magic. And broadly speaking, in the most general possible terms, magic usually comes in two flavors. There's your hard magic system, there's your soft magic system. Your hard magic system works very rigidly. Think of that as basically D&D. It's statted out. It has very specific parameters in terms of who can use it, how they can use it, the limits of its power, how one learns it, etc., etc., etc. It's very rigidly rule-based. Soft magic is what you get a bit more in fairy tales. You have people who can just kind of do magic, and the limits of what they can or can't do are very nebulous, if defined at all. Things like the genie from Aladdin, that's soft magic. The fairy godmother from Cinderella, that's soft magic. So far as we can tell, there's really no limit to what it is they are capable of doing. There don't seem to be a ton of rules, and what few they are don't do a lot to actually cap the capabilities of the magic users in question. Now, in my book, Dreams of Fire, I actually use both. I have a hard magic system and a soft magic system. Funny thing, I didn't set out thinking, I'm going to mix both of these together. I've never seen anyone do that before. Somebody probably has at some point, I just don't know off the top of my head. But it just kind of happened by accident, because I have magic coming in two fairly distinct flavors. So there's the elementals, who are like my main character, Ferris, which is they carry within them and generate within themselves a specific kind of elemental force. In his case, he is a fire elemental, but there are other elementals as well. There are air elementals, there are water elementals, there is basically ice elementals. So things like that, and they have pretty rigid rules. The elementals are operating under a hard magic system. So they are only generating one specific kind of energy. The amount of control they have over it is very limited, but what it does is very specific. Ferris is a fire elemental. He creates fire. That's kind of what he does. That's kind of all he does. And it is very rigidly structured in terms of the cap of what it is he's capable of doing. And the number of things he can do, actually fairly limited. And that's by design, because he doesn't have a ton of control on it. And just to be clear, he's never going to have a ton of control on it. This is not a world where you master your power, and so it's like second nature. It's like, no. The best you can ever manage to do is maybe point at the direction that you're unleashing this energy, but you cannot really control what it does once you do that. It's going to do whatever that kind of energy does. And in the case of fire, it's going to burn stuff. That's just what's going to happen. So the elementals function under a pretty hard, pretty rigid, pretty restricted magic system. However, I also have the Fae. I have fairies. I have the wild world magic. And that is a pretty soft system. I do have some sort of parameters in terms of certain types of Fae operating certain types of magic. So, like, I have kobolds who are doing more earth-based magics. I have pixies who are a little bit illusory, and also, to a certain degree, helping plant growth and things like that. I have a Huldra, which is more sort of sonic and auditory-based, but it's not rigidly defined. They can only do these things. It's not a limited repertoire. It's maybe kind of a range of things, but I've also got the Morrigan, and the Morrigan basically has no limit on what she can do at all. Now, the thing about a soft magic system, when one is being employed, they tend to show up, as I said, oftentimes in fairy tales and oftentimes in supporting character roles. It's actually going to be, at least in my experience off the top of my head, the stuff I'm used to reading, you don't get a ton of soft magic systems where the empowered person in question is either your main character or your main villain, because soft magic is hard to rein in and explain why it does or doesn't do any given specific thing. So if you're gonna have somebody with more or less unlimited magic, it's kind of hard to have them be the lead character unless the entire point is them trying to learn how to do it. I think the closest you get is maybe somebody like Schmendrick from The Last Unicorn, which has a very soft magic system, and he is one of the lead characters, arguably the lead human character, but all he can do is sort of tap into magic. His ability to control what happens when he does that, very, very limited. So again, there's the control thing going on there. In my case with the Morrigan, the reason I felt comfortable giving the Morrigan basically no hard limits on what she can do, it's because her intents and agenda and goals are neither directly aligned with nor in direct opposition to my main character. How readers choose to interpret the Morrigan, be it as an antagonistic figure or an obstacle or just a hazard, is going to be kind of up to them. But she is not the direct antagonist of the story. And what it is she wishes to do, while it impacts and affects the main character and the supporting characters, it is not about them. She is not attempting to stop or harm them. And she is not trying to deliberately halt the main character's goals. So she's not an antagonistic figure. So her being overpowered doesn't suddenly mean, well, there's no way my hero can win. And by the same token, she is not assisting the hero, because if she was, then she'd basically turn into, I don't know, something like the Good Witch Galinda from The Wizard of Oz, who just at any time could have waved a wand and solved the whole dang thing if she'd wanted to. But again, not going to be the case here, because she's running her own agenda. And I will talk more specifically about the narrative function of which I'm using the Morrigan and the various Fae creatures that I am using in this story. I'll talk about that in another video at another time. But I had to bring her up talking magic and talking about the ways in which I use it. It's funny, one of the first things I worked out was the magic system for this, because I decided early on, after having that initial sort of vision for the lead character that I talked about in earlier entries in this, I realized I wanted this magic to be something that they could not control. This is not a gift. This is not something where, okay, it's rough at first, but then you get a handle on it. Nobody gets a handle on it, which is actually why the elementals are as restricted as they are. It's why no elemental has more than one element going on with them, because if I'm going to be dealing with magic that primal, so primal that it cannot be controlled, I can't just have it being like the magic could be any number of things. Like, no, it needs to be one specific thing, because otherwise that is way too much of basically having a random number generator in the middle of my story that could cause any effect at any given time. So my desire to not allow elementals to have a high degree of control over their elemental magic was what led me to the decision to have the elements be specific and be restrictive in the first place. So that was the way in which I sort of came at the magic systems that I have in play in this particular story. So there you go. If you found that interesting, hope so. If not, I don't know. Hope you found the next one more interesting. So those were my thoughts, a few of my general thoughts on magic systems in fantasy stories, and some of the specific ways in which I am using it and intending to use it in mine. So thanks so much for listening, and see you next time.